It is, one supposes, on some days, it's sometimes possible, theologically speaking, to imagine a God who has no body, God of ideals, God of spirit, God of thought, God of no thing, therefore God of nothing, God with what a tragedy that a human, all flesh and bone in her world, wood and stone, water and earth, could be so disembodied herself that she conceives a God without a body, without its hunger, and without its creaks, without its folds and its foldings, without taste buds, without a pulse to quicken, to pound in the throat when the scent of the one she needs rules over all sense. To love an idea can be quite satisfying, but only the body, beloved, is holy, holy, holy. Hope is a body feathered. Every prayer for hope sprouts from God's body, a feather. Every prayer for vengeance sprouts a wound from a feather plucked. Once and again, every now and then, there are on God's body, there are feathers, oh feathers, enough to fly, but daily and daily God's body sinks and swells and pusses ooze while we cry out, Ana el Narefa Nala. A poem titled Habasar Vihafgu by our tonight's guest, Elliott, batTzedek, which was actually published on a site where there are services once a month, and this was on May 3rd, 2023. So uh, tonight's guest is the author of that poem, Elliott batTzedek. Elliott is the author of The Embodied Coal of My Tongue, the recipient of a Leeway Foundation Art and Change Award for her translations and a residency at Norcroft, a writing retreat for women. Elliott's poems, essays, and translation have been published in many journals, including the American Poetry Review, Massachusetts Review, Apiary, Poetica, Philadelphia Stories, Sinister Wisdom, Trivia, the Lesbian Review of Books, Doublespeak, Menacing Hedge. And that's just a sampling of all. I could probably be reading it for another 5 minutes for all the publications. Elliott's work has also appeared in the anthologies, the 2012 Two Lines Translations Anthology, Women Write Resistance, Poets Resist Gender Violence, the English edition of the 2013 Hebrew anthology, Israeli Women's Protest Poetry, edited by Dorit Weissman, and the Oxford University Press textbook, Gender Through the Prism of Difference. And to add to this, a most recent and a very prestigious award, and it's just been announced, and that's the Sandy Crimmins 2024 Poetry Prize, which I believe Elliott will read a poem tonight. Elliott, like a lot of us artists, has a day job. She works in multiple roles within the book-selling industry, as an event manager at a bookstore, as a member manager for a regional indie bookstore trade association, as the administrator for the Professional Booksellers School, and as the dean of that school's course in event management. Elliott, welcome.
Thank you
We're
so
really
much, Charles.
we have so much to cover because this is a very interesting and very multi-talented person. Because we think of, you know, most of the people we come on there, we say, well, they are poets, and yes, Elliott is a new poet and a very extraordinary one, but she also is a liturgist. And I just learned this when I did some background and conversation with her, and actually went on the website. Um, and I think before we move to poetry, I want to discuss this because I did go on this site that Elliott shared with me. It's called Fringes, and it's called Fringes Haverha. I hope I'm
Havara.
Havara. And I was very moved when I found this because on this site, the level of spirituality that expressed here in the literature, there is poetry throughout these, there is music. And, someone who is a Christian, raised as a Catholic myself, I was just overwhelmed. I was really overwhelmed when I read the liturgy in here. And I have to say, I'm really moved. I want to know more. I really want to go to one of these, gatherings and to listen and to participate and to be in that moment of spirit, be in a moment together with other people. So I just wanted to talk to you about that.
Sure
This
thing.
evolution of you as a liturgist, but very much a liturgist poet in the that comes through in what I've seen on your site.
The oldest liturgy is poetry. I mean, the oldest parts of the Old Testament, if you actually look in them written in Hebrew, they're poems on the page. It's the oldest thing that we know. It's part of how language formed for us. The rhythm, the beat, the repetition of sounds, that's like deep inside of our human wiring. It's right there. So for me, it made perfect sense that those two things would be combined. That what I know as a poet about how all the ways language works, I could build into writing liturgy that feels really alive in your mouth,
Hmm.
right? Like a lot of modern liturgy is theologically correct for our times, but feels very flat. And people use it in a service and it doesn't stir their hearts. And they're like, oh, modern liturgy isn't any good. I'm like, well, good modern liturgy is very good. So it really took bringing in that learning as a poet to make liturgy that would start to really come alive.
What I failed to say in your introduction and even in your biography is the fact that you're a rabbi.
I'm not a rabbi.
Okay,
I I almost went to rabbinical school,
okay. I'm
and then I
sorry.
realized that I wanted, in fact, to write liturgy and not
Okay,
go through 7 years of rabbinical school.
okay,
So instead, I went to an MFA program and worked with Alicia Ostreicher,
okay,
who's not a rabbi, but she's my rabbi.
okay,
But I am a lay leader of Jewish services.
okay. Tell me about these services. How long you've been
Right.
doing this, and how it is different from what we know. Whether we're talking about whether you're a Jew, a Christian, or you're a Muslim, whatever you are, how unique this is.
We are unique in all the world, as far as I can tell. Our group is called Fringes, which refers to the seat that's on the prayer shawl, the fringes that are on prayer shawls. Fringes, a feminist, non-Zionist Havurah, and we were founded in 2007. We were a group of pretty much dissident feminists who wanted a Jewish prayer life, but didn't want everything to be God the King, God the King, God the King, God the remote thing. You always say the same prayers, which are only in masculine Hebrew. So, where are our voices as women? And in large part, we're responding to a challenge from a feminist theologian, and whose name has totally escaped me, but it will come to me, Rachel Adler, who, in a chapter about revising prayer for communities, throws out the challenge: if we don't mean the words we say when we're praying, what are we doing? So we decided to make a group where we would mean the words that we said.
Hmm.
And so we would use almost entirely contemporary poetry as our liturgy and then have truly beautiful music. I think our tagline at first was um, prayers that sing and songs that pray,
Hmm.
because we wanted a different kind of spiritual life. And so we built it because no one was doing any such thing anywhere. So we simply built our own.
So it started as as a service that was live in a place, and then it grew after the pandemic to a virtual.
Yeah.
How broad is your reach now in your?
We went national during the pandemic, and even more so now, as more and more Jews are very upset at how Israel is bombing Gaza. They're finding in their synagogues, in their Jewish communities, that their questions and their anger are not welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're looking for other homes where they don't have to give up being a committed Jew, but can be very, very critical of how Israel is behaving.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this huge influx now, especially of younger Jews who are looking for a spiritual home that lets them be their full moral selves. So we're actually seeing my email list is jumping and jumping. It doesn't always mean those people turn up, but there's certainly a lot of interest right now. And there's other synagogues and Havurah being formed around the country, although none of those have the feminist take where they make up their own prayers.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing traditional prayers. So we're still our very odd little community. We're not for everyone, but for the people that we're for, it is their spiritual life that they come to this.
And Havurah is translated.
It's a
to me,
fellowship, like a fellowship or a
fellowship.
prayer community.
And it began in the late 60s. And
Yeah, that word to mean non-rabbi led kind of alternative prayer
Okay.
communities started in the U.S. as the Havurah movement in the late 1960s.
Okay.
This group came along in 2007, and we used the word Havurah to show that we didn't want to be a synagogue, we didn't want to collect dues, we didn't want to buy a building, we didn't want to hire a rabbi. We wanted to have services that spoke our hearts for us.
Yeah.
And that's what we set out to do.
In one of the things that I read on the site, among other things, was a recasting of Psalm 136 or 137.
Yeah.
137, which when I was reading the Psalms, kind of just stuck in me. And then when I read your version of rewriting that Psalm, I was really kind of blown away. How beautiful it was and how it ended compared to the original 137 ended. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, Psalm 137, most people know as the Bob Marley song, "We wept for Zion." We lay down and wept for thee, Zion. So it's a psalm that's about the original expulsion of Jews from the first temple under the Babylonians. Our history goes back a long way. And it starts off about, we sat amongst the strangers and they compelled us to sing a song of our land, but how can we sing of our land when we're in this foreign place? But it ends, and no one likes the ending of this psalm, with "Happy shall be he who dashes your little ones against the rocks." So it ends with this act of tremendous violence, which the Psalms do. The Psalms capture a huge range of human emotion, and they're often quite more violent than people like to think they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that the rewriting that I did very much grew out of my political organizing work around Israel and Palestine and trying to reconceptualize how people think Zionism is the only answer to keep Jews safe. I don't think that it is. So in mine, I'm actually thinking about what does it mean to weep for Zion, which was a place and time that Jews yearned for. Like it was a lost homeland and a place that we would come to in the future. And how that's different from the Zionism, which we see now unfolding in Gaza. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to write a piece that kept the beauty of that ancient yearning for a homeland, but was very honest about what took shape in the 20th century and the violence that has come from those decisions. But then turning that into a kind of prose poem psalm. It's a complicated piece.
Yeah, that's so refreshing to hear. I really, because of the narrative that has been, created, about what is happening,
Right.
and the capturing of Judaism by what people really don't understand.
Right.
And so, going on that site and reading that, I would recommend that anybody go do it, because you'll see a very different version
Right.
of Judaism, and what I consider a very soulful Judaism. So one of the main things, other than that you're a liturgist, is that you're a translator.
Yep.
And you have done this marvelous translation of an Israeli poet by the name of Says.
Right.
And you shared with me that which is going to be published by Moonstone in the spring. And the title of her book is...
The book is
It's,
called The
yeah,
Dance of the Lunatic.
lunatic, right? And that shows up as
Yep.
a couple of lines, actually in the poems. And I'm very interested in people who translate, and I just wanted to quote something I read, actually from someone who is translating from Polish to English, and it's the name of the translator was Iwa Crucial. And I'll just quote this: the translator is only a midwife who recognizes the insufficiency of the source and target language entrusted to him or her. After all, the translation is the testimony to both the human desire and inability to express the ineffable. Yet by translating, we are prolonging the life of the poem. We are multiplying it. We practice bilocation in love.
Oh, I love that. What a great
So,
quote.
yeah, isn't it? So, can you, kind of amplify on, expound on that? Is the process? Because I read some of your notes in the back on translation, and it was really mind-boggling what you have to do your translation.
I did an MFA. I went to an MFA in poetry, and they had a poetry and translation program. I am not, languages do not come easily to me. Um, as a kid, I had a horrible speech problem, so I could barely speak English for years and years, even though it is my first and only language. So I avoided the translation track. But the translators kept coming and talking about language, and everything they said was the smartest thing I'd ever heard. And I just could not stay away. So I finally said, I'm going to break through my own fear about this and do this, because I got to study with like Willis Barnstone, who in his life has translated everything. He doesn't even know how many languages he knows, maybe 80.
Mm.
He's this amazing powerhouse of a translator. And Peter Cole came, who translates from modern Hebrew and modern Arabic. And one of the things he said early on that I loved, because everyone quotes the Robert Frost canard about poetry is like playing, or translations like playing tennis without a net, whatever. And what Peter Cole had to say is, all poetry is translation. We are trying to translate something barely felt that we don't have language for inside of ourselves into a language. That is an act of translation. So to translate between languages is no less authentic than to translate into any one language that we write in. And that just really stuck with me. And then I did 3 semesters of learning, working with experienced translators to learn how their process worked. It was an amazing learning, and it taught me more about words and grammar and syntax than I ever learned in my life. It totally changed how I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
The MFA made me a much better poet. The translation program absolutely changed how I wrote.
Wow. There was a article I read several years ago, and it was actually by a translator, and it was on the translation of poems by Thomas Transmer, the Swedish famous Nobel Prize-winning poet. And what he showed in this article was how two translators arrived at a different kind of rendering of these poems. And he said we should stop calling them translations and call them versions of it. Because I think, well, I'm not saying that. It gets a little confusion because I think people want an exactitude that maybe
It's just
somehow
not possible.
it's impossible.
Right?
And
Because your language is an entire culture. I mean, right? That's why when a language goes extinct, a world goes extinct. Language is not just a dictionary, it's a culture.
yeah,
And so you're translating not just the grammar, you're translating from one culture into another. And that's the challenge and also the mystery and the beauty of it.
absolutely. So let's talk about says. And at number one, uh, I went online and what a fascinating
She is a
person
completely
that
fascinating person.
you have selected. But number one, how did you meet up with her and her poems? Tell us more about her because she's more than a poet.
She's a poet, she's a novelist, she's a singer, she's a writing teacher, she's done plays, she's done memoir. She's really remarkable. I met Shez's work because I was looking for a translation project. And of all second languages that I do not have, the one I was closest to having was liturgical Hebrew, which is not the same as modern Hebrew, but at least I could break into the alphabet and know what I was doing. Um, and so I was looking for a project. And at a Dyke History Conference in New York City, a young woman came up and introduced herself. She recognized my voice because she'd heard a radio program that I had done about fringes. So we started talking. She's Israeli. And I said, hey, I would prefer a feminist or a lesbian poet. She's like, oh, there's this poet Shez that no one knows about. And I found one web page with 3 of her poems on it. Nothing else about her, just this web page with these 3 poems. And I started translating one of them and I'm like, wait, what is she? No, nobody says that. And slowly through, I don't know, a friend of a friend, got her phone number. Like it took a while because there wasn't much on the web about her at that point. And what was in modern Hebrew, which is written without vowels. And I am not a fluent reader of Hebrew without vowels, so that was tricking me up. Because liturgical Hebrew is generally written with the vowels, and modern Hebrew is not. So it took a little while, but eventually I found her and got her on the phone and then started Skyping with her and started this long, slow project. The book itself is about 80 poems. So it was a long, slow project. And I was working with my translation mentor, Ellen Dore Watson, and I was working with Shez herself, and I was working with my friend Mai Swartz, who is a native modern Hebrew speaker. And when sometimes we'd hit words or phrases that were kind of dated, because Mai was very much younger, we would call Mai's mom to be like, hey, what did this slang word mean in Israel in 1992? So that whole process of working with that team really brought this to life. I put in endless hours, but I could not have done it without that team.
Yeah. Well, the piece that you wrote at the back of the book, and I'm glad that Larry is going to include that in the publication because I think it gives the reader a good understanding or let's say a taste of what one has to do in translation. Can you talk about, and I know you're going to read her poems, but can you talk about what the focus of her collection is?
Right. Well, this collection was her first one that came out in 1999. And at the time, it was the first book by a lesbian poet ever in modern Hebrew when it came out. So it was a new thing on the planet in and of itself. She has another book that just came out last year, another poetry book with all of the ones in between. But this was her first one. And it caused all kinds of scandal in Israel for being openly lesbian, for being critical of patriarchy, for saying some of the things that she said about God and also naming her father as a sexual abuser. She had some very intense reactions to it. She had been a punk rocker. It's really funny. She's just a couple years older than I am. Although I was here in the U.S. and she was in Israel, our lives have many things in common because we came out at about the same time. And the gay world in the U.S. and in Israel, there's of course a lot of interchange. So there was a lot of similarities, even with the cultural differences. And so I was finding things that were very familiar to me because I knew U.S. lesbian poetry so well. There were things that were very familiar to me, and then there were also things that were so utterly challenging and new, which I loved. Like that gave me ways in. So I had a grasp, but so much to learn at the same time. She's gone back to performing recently, and a lot of the poems from Dance of the Lunatic are also written as songs, and you can find videos of those on YouTube. And they're really wonderful and powerful. They are in Hebrew, and there's not translations on the screen. I follow along with my printed version to make sure I'm getting it, but just the power of them exists nonetheless. So,
and also in the collection itself, and the focus of her experience, how she uses different characters. I mean, between God and we'll hear Hitler, and I mean, it's really stunning and almost shocking in a way. Some of some of what she includes, which I'm going to use a word, it would be like heresy in other places to include them as perpetrators.
Well, her publisher did get a bomb threat when the book came out.
Wow. Wow.
Those were some of the first poems of hers I encountered. And there's something I know very well in U.S. Jewish culture. I mean, it's all around the world, but here it became a feminist process of doing midrash, which is a way of adding to the story. Like, that the biblical characters, they went here and they went there and they had this kid and midrash tells the story of everything in between that isn't told. So it adds to the story. Well, starting in the 60s here with that bloom of feminism, Jewish women started saying, I'm sick of there being no Jewish women in any of these stories. We're going to start writing them in. And Alicia Oestreicher was very much one of the strong creators of that. So it was really amazing to get to study with her. So I thought at first Shez was doing midrash. I'm like, oh, she's writing about Abraham and God and her father on the surface. But once I spent any time at all with the poems, I realized she's not writing midrash. She's not trying to explain the biblical story. Growing up in Israel, well, that is the culture. Like, not as a religious thing, that's what you learn in school. That's your national text that you study. She knows it in a way that I will never know it, and she's using it in order to blow it apart. Her father's name actually was Abraham, and he sexually abused her throughout her childhood and was also, violent to her mom and her sister. And so she's taking that story of Abraham and God and just using it to blow apart, right? It's something Audrey and Rich talked about very early on, I think, in Your Native Land, Your Life, about will these words blow the family apart? And Shez very much intends those words to blow the family apart. Like all of us, she's mellowed since her, mid-20s poetry writing, but she very much intended that to be what was going on. And it, as an incest survivor myself, it completely floored me. Her honesty and her approach and the way she was not going to apologize for her rage really just struck my heart, and I knew that I had to work on these poems.
Yeah, having read the collection and reread it, I am really so impressed that Moonstone's going to do this.
I'm really
Because I
thrilled.
think that people, let's say the Moonstone community is really going to be kind of blown away when they get this. This is very different. This is very different from, we have great poets with great chapbooks, but this is going to be really kind of a stand on its own. It's really going to be great.
It is, but one of the things I love about Larry and Moonstone, I've been reading at Moonstone things since it was still above Robin's bookstore, is there's always been not just a space, but a welcoming home for, poets of color who are talking about, the cost of racism, and poets talking about surviving child abuse, and queer poets and trans poets. Like, Moonstone has welcomed and nourished voices of dissent. So this was the perfect home for this. It's the first place I sent it to.
Well,
and Larry has always encouraged and supported my own work so much.
Yeah.
So where else would do this, possibly?
I'm so glad you do. I think it's a perfect fit. And, it is very consistent with the things that Larry's been doing. You've seen the anthologies that he's been doing. This most recent one about patriotism that really focuses on the insurrectionist, and the insurrection is really quite. I'm very anxious, to see that. But he's done so many like that. So I mean, we could talk on and on about this. Really, I mean, I could do another show with you, definitely, and we will. We will.
I would be delighted.
After it gets published. But I want to give you now the floor so that you can read the poetry you want to read and share with us.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll always come back. This is delightful. So I'm going to start reading some of the poems from the Shez translation, which is called A Necklace of White Pearls, because that's the image. I chose just a handful of her poems that are all about the same theme. There are many different themes in the book as a whole, but these are the ones that it was a story I needed to tell, and I wanted her voice to be available to readers in the U.S. because she is doing remarkable things. So just a few things about these to get you into the cultural moment. She uses the word for God she uses is Elohim. This is a common practice in Israel. Religious Jews will say Adonai or Hashem. Most Israelis are secular, and they use the word Elohim, which is one of the names of God in the Old Testament. But they use that to say, this is a cultural story that I'm telling. This isn't a religious thing that I believe. So I kept the word Elohim to be true to who she is as an Israeli poet, even though it's a familiar word in Israel and an unfamiliar word here. Translation is always a series of choices, and I decided I'd rather have her voice here than something familiar to U.S. readers. As I said, her father is named Abraham or Avram. It's the same name. And a lot of these poems are playing, of course, with the story of Abraham being willing to sacrifice his son Isaac. Isaac is never mentioned in this book, which is also fascinating to me. But she's telling and retelling a story about being a girl who was sexually abused inside of this cultural context. It was in the power of Elohim to keep us in the Garden of Eden. Elohim was then like a cool breeze on a Hamsin day. It was in his power to pacify our wanting to know, to rub our cheeks with his soft cheek. It was his intention to swing us in the hammock of his warm embrace forever. It was his design to bind us to his breast. It was from his modest lips, a voice hushed, tenuous, completely alone, after we were driven from Eden. Elohim remained there by himself, his breasts dripping useless milk. Elohim so loved us, his daughters. It was Avram whose teachings altered Elohim's dreams, his thoughts, whose hypnotic music hidden in the howl of the Hamsin made Elohim faint. Avram who banished the abandoned girl. Even though you dared take Elohim from me, even though you dared take Elohim from me, Elohim is present inside me. She is beyond gender. She is beyond all the letters multiplying in your books, beyond your synagogues. Elohim, present in every stairwell in which I was ever forsaken. She is breath, and I'm a balloon, once dim and now brilliant, flying into the heavens, rocking myself in the bosom of Elohim. Exodus from Auschwitz. I should also say she uses images of Hitler and Auschwitz, and when I asked her about that, she said, that's the emotional truth. And she doesn't take that lightly. She had family that was lost in the Holocaust. She is not using this in any way that's dismissive. It is the word that defines her experience of what happened. So, Exodus from Auschwitz. And in Kiryat Ono, 9 Montefiore Street, entrance 1, third floor on the right, Father Abraham will stir the pot of soup, and he will laugh at anything amusing on the radio. Everything here is in order, he'll say to his soul, and the heavens will echo, all this is only the rebellious daughter blowing more hot air. In his love for me. In his love for me, Hitler slowly slides the first pearl of the necklace into my throat. A second comes, then another pearl, and another, white snake lengthening, slithering in. Again, Elohim waved me away from his face tonight, and again Abraham comes. I went quietly upon the waves. I was careful not to step on the shells. Release me from the altar only tonight. But no, because again Elohim say, evil girl. And again, like always, Abraham comes. I closed myself silently in the bathroom. I didn't wrestle. I didn't write poems. Release me from the altar only tonight. But no, because Elohim are tired, are falling asleep, lying on soft, empty breasts. Mother. My mother walks me through the spacious fields to die, pressing me to sing a sweet song in my coarse voice, while the soles of my repugnant feet tread upon the holy earth. Adamat Avraham Avinu, the land of Abraham, our father, my mother repeats, wetting the words against my face, small, my face disgusting, my face that will never be the face of a woman. Again he thrusts into me. Again he wounds me. Again he builds a house out of the bubbles of his words. Again tonight I'll visit your dreams, my father. I will dance the dance of the lunatic. This time I will come to you with strength, with a violet umbrella, a slippity slap on the fingers of your hands, and it will open and carry you grasped tightly in its swollen fingers into the cloud's crackled mirror. I will force you to gaze upon me, my father. I will force you to bless me with peace. Letter to Elohim. Whatever there is, bring it. If not now, when? If not now, when? Tell me, whatever there is, bring it, because for me there is no tomorrow, no waiting, no patiently, no more. No, for me there is no tomorrow, no waiting, no patiently, no more. Whatever there is, tell me and bring it now. Whatever there is, tell me and bring it here now. I want dozens of flowers. I want wedding beds. I want light, light, light now. Bring it now. And take from me all evil eyes. And take from me quickly all evil speech. And take from me quickly all envy of me, all harm from those who would do evil to me. Take from me quickly all evil eyes. If not now, when? If not now, when? And take from me all belief that the evil eye is right. Take from me all belief that the evil eye is right. And any eye that is not for me is against me, and this hurts. Any eye that is not for me is against me, and this hurts. So many eyes are like this in the world. So many eyes are like this in the world. So many eyes are like this in the world. How do you allow it? Take from me all evil eyes, and all belief that the eye is right. Take from me all sickness, and tomorrow bring me health, flowers, love, now. If not now, when? If not now, when? Tell me what there is, and bring it to me now. Because for me there is no tomorrow, no waiting, no patiently, no more. No, for me there is no tomorrow, no waiting, no patiently, no more. Over everything, the fear lies, lashing inside me, inside brain, inside belly. Every time, fear would hardly dare move. He wouldn't dare because fear's a fool. He wouldn't dare because something happened to him, Daddy. The strap came down and went up, and then ugly things were said to the girl. And though she was ordered to forget, the girl couldn't forget. She wandered with some dogs and bought kites and crowed a lovely cuckoo-riku in the mornings. When she was nauseous, she sailed over the clouds, over fear. But even there he inserted himself, up there and down there, flooding in from every direction. The girl didn't like it. She burned inside. And after this, she was strangled to death, and a necklace of white pearls was in her throat every single day. Dance of the Lunatic. I tried to move to the right, to the left, but Hitler stayed inside me. I cried, I shouted, I screamed aloud, but Hitler stayed inside me. I crossed over to a foreign land. I flew to another planet, but Hitler stayed inside me. The imprints of his breath landed and radiated and were swallowed up within my brain. I tried to move to the right, to the left, but Hitler stayed inside me. I cried, I shouted, I screamed aloud, but Hitler stayed inside me. I took a match. I ignited a bonfire. I burned a few yids. On Shabbat morning, I prayed, Ha'el, our Father, filled with mercy. I tried to move to the right, to the left, but Hitler stayed inside me. I cried, I shouted, I screamed aloud, but Hitler stayed inside me. I danced again the dance of the lunatic. I shattered all the reflections. Literary excuses. When it arrives, the day of judgment for fathers who rape, none of you will say even one word. Finally, you will sit in silence and give way before the horror of the weeping girl. But until that day of judgment arrives, you'll continue gagging me. You'll go on smiling graciously. You'll refuse to allow my words to be printed anywhere you are, and continue with the alibi of literary value. He, this, they will not in the end murder me, mother. I still love flowers in the spring, daffodils in an old honey jar, the smell of the ocean, and a smiling woman wrapped in my arms. You know, the sadness was gone from her eyes the second I leaned over her. You know there is strength in me. You must make this to not, in the end, be my murderer, mother. So that's Shez.
Wow.
That's a small part of the power of Shez's work. It haunts me in a good way.
Well, it is. It's beyond powerful. It really is. When I'm sitting here, I was just kind of shaking listening to that, because you can read it, but then when you really hear it out loud, it's.
One of the great things about being a translator is, as a poet, I'm very shy about promoting my own work. But as a translator, even though this is my work and I worked really hard on this, I'm promoting Shez, and that's like super easy. I can talk her up all day.
Uh-huh.
So when the book comes out, I will tell everyone, because I'm very excited that people here get to know this poet that they would never have known otherwise. So my current obsession as a poet is writing about whether or not God has a body. And I am shocked by this, and everyone who knows me is shocked by this. I'm kind of a very spiritual atheist, honestly. And I never thought I cared about whether or not God had a body. And that embodied male God on the throne with a beard, I wanted nothing to do with. But, our brains are our brains. And I got obsessed with this question, and also with digging deeper and deeper into Jewish text and Jewish history, which is so long and so weird and so fascinating. And kind of the more appalled I am by how the nation Israel is behaving, the more I'm clinging to the history of the people Israel to find meaning and to guide me forward, because I don't want to give up what I love so much, even when I'm appalled. So each of these poems has some sort of source text to it, which sometimes I'll describe or not. This first one is called The Source of All Healing. And the source text from this is from Marcia Falk, who's a contemporary feminist liturgist, from her Book of Blessings. And there's also an echo in here from Audrey and Rich, who says, in your native land, your life, the problem is to connect without hysteria the pain of anyone's body with the pain of the world's body. Source of all healing. God's body has been created in the image of man by men, yes, and some women, citizens of a small handful of nations for a small span of centuries. But even knowing how tiny really is this understanding, still it looms over me, a welding, a helmeting in of what of all possible thought I might think. For the very thought body insists on specifics. Specifics that in the body's world demark how much of a person a body gets to be. So embodied God must also be either fully human or not. A problem faith in an unembodied God avoids. But I am a physical being in a physical world, and that world is the only source. The source text of this is a line from Exodus, where God, who's been called other names, introduces the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and says to the Jews that he's helping leave Egypt, says, my name Yah, I didn't make that known to your ancestors. I'm only making this known to you now. So that is the source text for this, the name that wasn't known before. The problem with God's body isn't God's body, but God. And you do, I suppose, want to know just what exactly I mean by God, as either this God and God body is outbounds of your ken, or also, how dare I use such an antiquated, male-sprung, power-over, trite and treacly term? And I agree, yes, how dare? How dare I? Well, I answer, I do dare. And also I confess, oh, I confess, yes, confess to not care which reason you find for offended, or attached, or screw loosened, or monkey in the middle. I confess to being too exhausted to weave a new word, then explain how it is and isn't like the old one, then argue about which new word has the least failings of moral, then the memes, God save us all from the memes, and then God save us all, Twitterverse will spittle up a word so politically proper it can't be pronounced. And here we are, back at Jew. With our God's name, we grew weary of arguing about how it was said. So, you see, I find I'm aligned with whichever ancestor editor finally tossed into the fire her stylus, and then her heavy, flat sheet of clay proclaiming, we're going with the word God, get over it. I love that ancestor. And Charles, you read this one, but I love it, so I'm going to read it too. Habasar v'haguf, the flesh and the meat. Basar is flesh, like meat that you would eat, right? But can also mean our bodies, and goof is the body. So somehow they're both about the body, but one is about the animal fleshiness of us, and one is about being a person who lives in a body. And both of those concepts are here, the flesh and the body. It is, one supposes, on some days at some times possible, theologically speaking, to imagine a God who has no body, God of ideals, God of spirit, God of thought, God of no thing, therefore God of nothing. God, what a tragedy that a human, all flesh and bone in her world of wood and stone, water and earth, could be so disembodied herself that she conceives a God without a body, without its hungers and without its creaks, without its folds and its foldings, without taste buds, without a pulse to quicken, to pound in the throat when the scent of the one she needs rules over all sense. To love an idea can be quite satisfying, but only the body, beloved, is holy, holy, holy. The body remembers everything it has ever been, and this is the Sandy Crimmins Editor's Choice poem. The body remembers everything it has ever been, and by this, I don't mean the eggs in me that grew inside the fetus that was my mother inside her mother's womb. I mean how when cats flick their talkative tails, we sense precisely the heft of our own, feel the spark and the stretch of dormant muscles ready to twitch, and I mean how we are blessed by remnants of first worm segmentation. So yes, our guts have brains. And yes, our tongues are smart and lithesome as octopus tentacles. And yes, our hands can reach up from each side of our bilateral bodies and meet in the middle and clap again. I mean how when I whisper, you have wings. You open your chest, you pull your shoulders back, you feel your arms retract and sprout anew through the exact places in your back that ache whenever you have given up hope. Shh, now, a secret. Your thyroid gland is in your neck. For once you needed it to pull that precious iodine from the water fluttering through your gills. Now your fingers are flicking, aren't they? Readying to reach, aching to touch those most familiar flaps. Go on, no one's looking, and your hand knows just where on your neck to land. The source text for this is the first line of this poem is a line from the amazing and gone much too soon poet Jane Mead. The mind a galaxy, the life a cell. I am not equal to my longing. What I feel in spite of my life, slapped down, silenced, strangled by my life, how to reach inside a silo, a yaw, a root from earth to something tall for which the prairie had no name, a hungering for an eating. A swallowing I knew I could do, like swords or flames, but for what my throat yearned, my mouth knew no taste, my nose no smell, my skin no possible, my heart had no limits, but my life had no language beyond the everyday, the every night, the don't you dare, the little ladies don't do that, the just who do you think you are, the 1,000-pound chairs of don't ever tell, you'd better never tell. What kind of world creates a child on fire, then beats her for burning? This hugeness that I wanted, I learned better than to want. I learned better than to want, and yet.
And now that's the poem that is the finalist for the Crimmins, or
No. The finalist was the finalist was the Body Remembers Everything It Has Ever Been.
Right.
This one will be coming out this spring in Broadkill Review, so look for it. And this is another one that will be coming out soon. It's called All Beings Yearn, and that source text is from a book interpreting the prayers and talking more about how to pray by Rav Avraham Kook, translated by Rabbi Mike Feuer. And there's also a blessing inside of this that's the Hebrew blessing for creation. We bless God who created the works of creation. All beings yearn. Deep this drive to create a someone, God perhaps, or some iconic divine, or at least a mind-sparked mover prime, some tender alien intention slowly growing before erupting into famed Big Bang. A someone who did make all this. A somewhat who, having done the deed, loves this terrarium enough to reach out a mighty arm and catch it, safe, before innings end with a final out. Wouldn't that be loverly? But time to give up savior delusions, naked apes who mouth, "Blessed are you, Creator," while sitting pretty in a life that lives by eating life. Who would rather lie prostrate in the toxic dust begging, save us, than stand up and set the world to rights. What Mashiach worth the honorific wants all that cosmic birth panting just to arrive to the mess we've made of both Makor and Yetzirah? We've forgotten playground rules where those that smelt it dealt it. Anthropocene time now, when Daddy save us supplications belie our praise songs for creation. I say, if beg we will, must we beg for wisdom? Please, holy, 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 let understanding go bloom before time ticks out. No hope now for redemption but to become redeemers. Now that chanting Oseh Ma'aseh V'Reshit, but then not gearing up and wading into the muck, is the first ever actually mortal sin. Skip that one. And I'll end with, this poem is a finalist in the Crimmins Prize. It's called To Enter Into the Body of God. It's got a Hebrew prayer running down one side, which is also from feminist liturgist Marcia Falk, which is, let us bless the source of life, the source of wholeness and chaos, the source of good and evil, and the source of all creation. So each stanza of the poem replies to part of that prayer. To enter into the body of God. Nevarek et ein hachayim. To enter into the body of God is what sex wants to be. All that clanging and need, all that wanting to know, all knowing as electric charge leaps skin to skin. That very second everything knowable is your kin, is a universe entire without strangers. Makor hashlemut v'hatohu. To enter into no exit, no going back, to turn and turn and turn again, never to be turned around, never to be turned off, never to be turned down. In the heart of the body of God is a room with 1,000 doors, and all of them are yes. And while half are locked, your body is your key, and all you have to do is want. Makor hatov v'hara. It has been imagined that the body of God must be a mountain or ocean or other ancient vast, but I tell you now, the only way in is the desire rocking the dreams you have when you aren't a stranger to yourself, when you aren't asleep but are awake, oh, awake. When facing the rock face of your life, you desire a door, and one appears. In the very shape that your desire will be when you want desire enough to learn to praise its name. Makor Kol Yetzirah.
Wow. Really, such a
Thank you.
remarkable reading
Thank
on both your own as well as Sez's poem. Thank you very much, Elliott. This
You're
has
welcome.
really
This
been
has been wonderful having these conversations with you leading up
oh,
to this.
I tell you, I could, and we will come back when the book is published. I want you to promise me we will
Absolutely.
do that again.
Now I know where you are.
Yeah, now we know where I am, and thank you very much for Philly Cam. As always for putting this on. We're in our 8th season, and the people who have here have been so marvelous to make this happen. We went to virtual for all those years when we had the pandemic, and now we're back in the studio, and we have this lovely studio. And the man who really makes this happen for me is Sergio, who's behind the cameras, Gaiano, that is really marvelous and so flexible. He makes it so easy to do all this. So thanks very much to him. Now, we've talked about Larry Robin, we've talked about Moonstone, and I never get tired of talking about Larry. I never get tired of talking about Moonstone and the contribution that Moonstone has made to this cultural community, in poetry, in publishing, in giving poets who have never had a platform, who never had a platform before. And Moonstone is there to have a voice to respond to everything that is happening in our world, regardless of what is happening, whether it's the book banning, whether it's the insurrection, etc. So I only say that to those who are listening, to those who are looking, is that Moonstone is a treasure, as a cultural treasure organization in this city. And I only appeal to you to find a way to support us. You can go to Moonstone Center, moonstoneartscenter.org, and find out a way that you can support us. And not only will you find a way you can support us, but you will find these books. And pretty soon, Elliott's book is going to be on there, and I'm really going to tell you this is really a marvelous collection. And the afterwards in this about translation is worth the price of the book itself. And so it's really been a treat for me, to have the conversation. And it's really out of, a time, of what we're living through. I think that's offering a very alternative voice to what we're hearing in the media, what we're hearing in social media, etc. So I'm really grateful for that. For myself, I'm grateful for that. The other thing I want to say is, we talked about, fringes, and I'm sure that people can find a way to go onto that site if they're really interested out there to find more. So I appreciate everything.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to Philly Loves Poetry again next month.